Hi, it's me, Tim. It is June 1st. Happy Pride Month. Let's talk about being gay and being in the game industry. I got 40 years to cover, 4 full decades, so this might be a little long. So, the too long didn't watch, the TLDW is things are better. I was in the closet for the first half, not for the second half. So, now let's go through it decade by decade. So, let's start in the 80s. My first job was in 1981 at a little game company called Pegasus, changed its name to Cybron. I was in high school, totally in the closet. The 80s were when AIDS became a big thing. The news was constantly feeding stories about if you're gay, you're going to die. And that scared teenager Tim. Luckily, the about a year or two after I started at Pegasus, Cybron, when they started the bridge game, they hired a designer who knew bridge, and he was gay. And I remember thinking, well, this is great. Everybody seemed cool with it. He was really nice. His boyfriend was really nice. But there's something that happened that kind of stuck with me. There was a young artist and a young receptionist, both in their very early 20s. Remember, I was probably at this point 18, so they were only a few years older than me, but they were adults. And they were really cool. In my mind, they were super cool because they were always talking about going to concerts and smoking weed and like everything, a teenager aspires to do. One day I came into work and the designer's boyfriend was sitting in the lobby. And I'm like, oh, is everything okay? Where's the receptionist? He was like, oh, I'm just waiting for Nathan. He'll be done soon. I'm just going to wait here in the lobby. I said, okay. And I walked down the hall and I saw the receptionist and the artist talking. And as I went by, I heard the receptionist go, yeah, I can't believe his boyfriend comes by here. And I stopped and I was like, why? Your husband comes by all the time. And the artist's boyfriend comes by all the time. She goes, well, this is different. You wouldn't understand. I was like, I think I understand. And she was like, no, this is different. I just don't like it, like this being flaunted at me. And I was like, you mean the way I know you're Christian because you talk about it a lot? And she was like, I knew you wouldn't understand. And she stomped off. The artist thought it was hilarious. But she said, she's going to be frosty to you for a while. And I'm like, yeah. But when I went to my office, I realized what really bothered me about that was those two people at the company. If you had asked me to pick two people at that company that I thought I could have confided in, it would have been these two young, seemingly super liberal women. No. So that stuck with me for a long time. We finished the project while I was in college and I went off to graduate school. We're still in the 80s here. I went to graduate school in 87. This probably happened that fall or early 88. My next door neighbor also went to UVA, and she and her roommate were in social ecology. I was computer science, and my roommate was neurobiology. We would often have parties together because it was just fun to mix those groups of people. At one of the parties, I noticed one of their friends, a social ecology major as well. He was super quiet, and he normally was really, personable and bouncing around the party. He was super quiet, seemed really unhappy, wouldn't talk to anybody. The next day, one of my neighbors, Megan, she told me that he had come out to his father, and his father was so upset that he withdrew all of his financial support and told him not to come home. The problem was, without his father's financial support, he was having to leave school. And I was thinking, I'm in California, like hotbed of liberalness. And this is happening. A couple weeks later, Catherine came by to ask if me and my roommate could help him move. Apparently, because he couldn't stay in school, the school was kicking him out of student housing. He couldn't go home. He had to find some place to move, and he had to move like that day. So we all went over and we helped him move. We helped him load his moving truck. And I've never before seen a more absolutely dejected, demoralized person. This is a person who, weeks before, super happy, super devoted to his studies, was going to get a PhD in social ecology and go out and do good. And now he had no idea what he was going to do with his life. And I don't know what happened to him. Megan lost touch with him. We don't know where he went. So that kind of reinforced to me, okay, nothing's safe. So a couple years later, decided to leave grad school. I went to Interplay. This is the very beginning of the 90s. This is 91, early 92. Interplay at the time was very much, it reminded me of a fraternity at a university. It was mostly young men, young white straight men, and lots of, joking around, lots of partying, lots of, there was one person I remember, he ate fast food. He'd come in with fast food. He'd go out for lunch for fast food. He'd go out to dinner for fast food. I was like, he's going to regret that in a few years. But the thing about Interplay was there was a near constant level of homophobia. Today, it would be called microaggressions. Back then, we had no term like that, or I didn't know it. But it was a constant level. I don't think a day went by where someone didn't use gay to mean stupid. So they're like, oh, I watched a movie last night. That was so gay. Oh, this new game came out. Have you played it? It's so gay. We had a racquetball court that we'd all play racquetball in. And there were men's and women's locker rooms there. On more than one occasion, there would be people who would not want to take a shower after playing an hour of racquetball because the shower room was open. And I'm talking pretty high up in the organization. People would say like, yeah, I'm not showering in there. Who knows who's gay here? There were incidents where a temporary employee would come on to help with reception. People were joking around about him being gay. The worst thing that happened was mid-90s. I want to say around 95. I'm probably plus or minus a year. Someone at the company transitioned, and as a trans woman, she sent out an email saying, hey, this is what I'm going through, and I know some people, may have issues. So there are 4 women's rooms in this company. I'm only going to use this one. And literally it was either that day or the next day, I was leaving the office and there were 2 women talking right outside the exit. One of them, very high up, I want to say a VP, but I'm not sure. And they were complaining about that email. Oh my God, this is so, I can't believe I have to worry about this. What if I go in the bathroom and he's in there? And I was like, hey, she won't be in that bathroom. She told you the bathroom she's going to use. It's trivial. Use one of the other 3. Again, she just looked at me and again said those words, you don't understand. You can't possibly understand. This is I can't believe that he's allowed to impose on us this way. And I was like, it actually got worse than that, to the point where I said something. She said, I'm going to talk to HR about that. And I said, if you do, we're going to talk about this entire conversation. I never talked to HR, so I don't think she said anything. But that stuck with me. So now we're up to the 2000s. I have my own company, Troika. So you'd think I'd be out. I wasn't for most of it because I was very worried. The industry, a lot of the people were liberal, but the industry itself was very conservative. And I was worried, if I come out and Troika doesn't get a contract, it's always going to be in the back of my mind. Did we not get a contract because of I was out. Our first game, Arcanum, went great. We got no pushback from Sierra on any of our content. Perhaps we should have, but we didn't. But when I was working on Temple with Atari, yeah, we got a lot of pushback on that. There was a lot of cut content. I'll do a video about that at one point. But one of the cut content was there was a house of prostitution in the village of Nulb, and one of the prostitutes was lesbian. In fact, the quest about it was she was very unhappy, and you thought she was unhappy being a prostitute. No, she was just unhappy with who they assigned her to, client-wise. They were very unhappy. Atari was very unhappy with that and wanted me to take it out. I asked for it in writing because that's what the contract said. They would have to give me changes in writing, and they didn't want to do that. So eventually they just asked for whole sections, generic sections of Nulb to be gutted, including that, which we did. Interestingly, Bertram, the gay pirate, was not ever on a list of being removed. And he got noticed. Time magazine wrote up an article about gay characters in video games. It was a big thing. I did come out after Temple. I started dating an architect. He actually worked on the Irvine Spectrum, if you're ever down in that area of Irvine. And I told some people, and everyone was cool with it. But then, of course, we fell into Vampire. Vampire was crazy difficult, tons of crunching, and then Troika closed down after that. The next company I went to was Carbine in 2005. I was out from the very beginning. When I interviewed, I said, I'm out, I'm gay. I started in late 2005, and they were having a holiday party, and it was +1. And I remember telling the producer, who was Eric DeMilt, who I'd worked with at Interplay, I'm bringing a guy. Do you think there's going to be any trouble with that? And he said, nope. And that was great. In fact, I ended up having dinner with Robert Garriott, who was the president of NCSoft, Richard Garriott's brother. And he saw a ring on my finger because at that point I was engaged. And he knew we'd been putting in a lot of hours. And he said, does your wife have any trouble with all the hours you put in here? And I said, well, I'm only engaged, but my fiance, he doesn't have any trouble with it. And he was like, oh. He goes, do you have any trouble with homophobia here? Because if you do, just call me so we don't put up with that. And I was like, yes. In fact, the only issue that really came up at Carbine was I got a call one morning about 5:30 in the morning from the art director. There had been a fist fight. We had had a company party the night before. There had been some drinking. There had been a fist fight between one of my designers and one of his artists. One of his artists had said something homophobic to a gay designer who worked on my team. And they got in a fight. By the way, the art director handled it really well. So I remember feeling like when I was driving in, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be the gay director stomping in on it. No, the art director was like, this is bullshit. You're not going to do this. Now he made it clear if either of them got involved in something like this again, that would be it. They would be fired. So they both got written warnings, one for his remark and the other one for swinging, taking the first punch. But I remember thinking, well, this is nice. This is good. When I left Carbine in 2011, by that time I had been seeing someone else, dating. We got married that summer. I got married on the beach in Provincetown, which is where the Mayflower first landed. Don't listen to those people about Plymouth Rock. I found out later, years later, that the very first baby born when the Mayflower landed at Provincetown, Peregrine White, was my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. How cool was that? I got married on the beach about a half a mile from where the Mayflower had landed and this baby had been born. Came back from that vacation to find out my Wikipedia page had been defaced. I was now one of the top 100 gay game developers in the country. They fixed it up and everything, but it was one of those things where, like, really, people just can't let this go. So a few months later, I started Obsidian. Obsidian was great. I racked my brain trying to think of a single incident I had at Obsidian, and I didn't. It was the single most diverse, inclusive place I've ever worked at. It was great. The only thing I could think of had nothing to do with Obsidian. They would do a blood drive a couple times a year, and the Red Cross would come in. And every single time that happened, I would have a coworker go, "Hey, Tim, why aren't you giving blood?" Because I wasn't signed up. And even one time, because you had to walk through the main room to get out, I was leaving for lunch, and one of the nurses said, "Hey, do you want to give blood?" And I'm like, "Can a gay guy give blood now?" And they're like, "Oh, no, sorry. And so they back, but it happened every single blood drive. And the terrible thing is I'm A negative, which is a blood type that people need. And I remember that by thinking, I took a blood test and I got an A- because I missed the RH factor question. That's a little phlebotomy nerd joke. So that was the only thing that ever happened at Obsidian that even was, a tiny bit of a problem. It was a great place. In 2016, though, on Facebook, I got a death threat from somebody who loved Fallout but found out I was gay. And he's like, "Oh my God, I played a gay guy's game." I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but he sent me a death threat. I contacted Facebook. They blocked his account. He just made another account. But this time he figured out where I lived from a photo of me in my backyard. And I was like, that's it. I'm done. That day, I closed all my social media. I have no more social media accounts. Every single one of them was shut down. Some people go, "Oh, well, you're overreacting." I'm like, I don't get anything out of this anyway. So it was no point. However, the next year, 2017, I decided to start doing conferences. And I did 2 gay gaming conferences down in Australia. Australia is a really cool place, though, for game development. It reminds me so much of the US in the 90s, and not just because of their music, which reminds me of 90s US music. But I started doing it because I realized that if I did these things and people saw me, that maybe other people would go, "Oh, okay, I guess the game industry is more inclusive now." Part of the reason I did it was I realized as I was nearing the end of my career, I'd never once had a mentor who had gone through the things I had. It's hard for me to find anyone who's been in the industry longer. I know people who are a few years older than me who are in the industry, but they started later. I've literally never run into anyone who's been in the industry for a longer, continuous period than I have. And of course, I've never met anyone gay in the industry older than me, which means I had no mentor. I had no one to ask questions to, no one for guidance. It happened several times at Obsidian when we were interviewing an employee, a potential employee. Sometimes they'd pull me aside afterwards and go, "Hey, I'm gay, and I know you are too. Is this place cool?" And I'm like, "Yes." And I realized I've never been able to do that. So one reason I started doing conferences was I kind of wanted to at least be out there and talking about things and have people know I'm still around, and even though I'm not going to be on social media. And it did have I had some really nice talks and interactions with people at those conferences. And I can say this to wrap this very long video up. Despite the political circus that's going on today, now, things are a lot better than they were, especially in the 80s and 90s. I know a lot of LGBTQIA plus people in the industry. They're well received in their teams. They bring a lot of interesting experiences. We get a lot more interesting characters and games. And everything's better. Nothing's worse because of this. And I like that. And I think people kind of need to hear that, because there's a lot of loud, vocal people talking as if bad things are happening, even though nothing bad is happening. So, that's my really high level description of 42 years in the game industry as a gay game developer.